What would you do if your teenage daughter was humiliated, profiled, and thrown out of a luxury hotel lobby simply because of the color of her skin? Only for the manager to discover moments later that her father not only had the power to shut the place down, but actually owned it? Before we dive in, if you believe in justice, accountability, and stories where arrogance meets consequences, hit that subscribe button right now, because this story is going to leave you speechless. It was a warm Friday evening in downtown Atlanta, and the marble floors of the Grand Dominion Hotel gleamed under the glow of crystal chandeliers as business executives and tourists drifted through the revolving doors, rolling suitcases and sipping overpriced lattes from the lobby cafe, when 16-year-old Miara O'Neal stepped inside wearing a sleek black blazer, fitted jeans, and sneakers, her natural curls cascading over her shoulders, confidence radiating from her posture. She had flown, and early to surprise her father before a charity event scheduled for the next day, choosing not to tell anyone she was arriving because she wanted to prove she could handle travel on her own. And though her last name carried weight in certain circles, she preferred not to lead with it, preferring instead to be seen as herself first. Yet within seconds of approaching the front desk, she felt the subtle shift in atmosphere, the sideways glances from a middle-aged white couple clutching their purses a little tighter, the security guard straightening from his relaxed stance near the elevator bank. And behind the desk stood Richard Calloway, the hotel's general manager, a man in his mid-50s with slicked-back gray hair and a permanent expression of manufactured politeness that rarely reached his eyes, especially when he assessed guests he deemed out of place. And as Miara set her small carry-on beside her and offered a polite smile, explaining she had a reservation under O'Neal, Richard's eyes flicked from her face to her sneakers to the modest suitcase, and something hardened in his expression. He typed on the keyboard, paused, then looked up with a thin smile and said, "There must be a mistake because suites on the executive floor were reserved for premium members and long-standing corporate partners," his tone dripping with condescension. And Miara calmly pulled out her phone to show the confirmation email, her voice steady as she explained that the reservation had been made earlier that week, but Richard barely glanced at the screen before waving it off, claiming the booking system sometimes glitched and suggesting perhaps she was at the wrong hotel, even though the logo on the email matched the one embroidered behind him in gold lettering. And when she gently insisted that she was certain this was the right place, that her father was meeting her later, he leaned forward slightly and asked in a lower voice whether she was sure she hadn't confused the Grand Dominion with one of the more budget-friendly hotels a few blocks away, the implication clear, the microaggression sharp as a blade. A few guests nearby slowed their steps, sensing tension, while Miara felt heat rise to her cheeks but refused to let it show, replying that she was exactly where she needed to be. Yet Richard signaled to security anyway, claiming there was an issue with loitering in the lobby and that only registered guests could remain on the premises, and before she could protest further, the guard approached, not aggressively but with an unmistakable firmness, and asked her to step outside while the reservation discrepancy was handled, humiliation settling over her like a heavy coat as whispers fluttered through the air, phones subtly lifted to capture the spectacle. Outside on the sidewalk, city noise swallowing the sting in her chest. Miara took a deep breath and dialed her father, whose contact name simply read, Dad, and when he answered with his usual booming warmth, she tried to keep her voice light, but he heard the tremor instantly, asking what was wrong, and she recounted the encounter in clipped sentences, leaving out none of the details, and there was a long silence on the other end before a low, controlled tone replaced the laughter he'd carried moments earlier, telling her to stay exactly where she was. Inside the hotel, Richard had already dismissed the incident from his mind, muttering to a concierge about kids these days, trying to finesse their way into luxury spaces, unaware that in a black SUV turning the corner onto Peachtree Street sat Shaquille O'Neal, known to many as Big Shaq, the towering NBA legend turned businessman whose investment portfolio spanned restaurants, car washes, tech startups, and yes, a majority stake in the Grand Dominion hotel chain. A fact deliberately kept low profile after he acquired it through a holding company 2 years earlier because he preferred letting operations speak for themselves, trusting his executive team to uphold the values he championed. Holding company 2 years earlier because he preferred letting operations speak for themselves, trusting his executive team to uphold the values he championed: respect, excellence, and community. When the SUV pulled up and Shaq unfolded himself from the back seat, passers-by did double takes, some recognizing him instantly, others simply stunned by his imposing presence. And Miara felt a wave of relief as he wrapped her in a protective hug, his massive hand cradling the back of her head, whispering that she had done nothing wrong. Then without another word, he strode through the revolving doors, daughter at his side, the lobby falling into a stunned hush as guests realized a celebrity had entered, and Richard's rehearsed smile snapped into place as he hurried forward, hand extended, greeting Shaq as if they were old friends, launching into a speech about what an honor it was to have him visit the property. But Shaq didn't take his hand. Instead, he asked calmly why his daughter had been escorted out moments earlier, and Richard blinked, glancing at Miera with forced confusion, claiming there must have been a misunderstanding, that staff were simply verifying credentials, that safety protocols required discretion, weaving a narrative that painted himself as diligent rather than discriminatory. Yet Shaq's gaze remained steady, unblinking, as he requested the security footage from the past 20 minutes be pulled up immediately, and the confidence in Richard's posture faltered just slightly. Within minutes, the footage played on a monitor in the back office, clearly showing Miera presenting her confirmation, Richard dismissing it without review, and the subtle nod summoning security before any real verification attempt had been made. And when the clip ended, silence filled the room like a storm cloud, broken only by the hum of the air conditioner. And Richard attempted one last defense, suggesting perhaps unconscious bias training could be revisited, but that no harm had been intended. Yet Shaq finally spoke with a gravity that made every word land like a gavel, explaining that intent did not erase impact, that humiliation could not be undone by corporate jargon, and that the Grand Dominion was built on a promise of dignity for every guest, a promise Richard had shattered. What Richard did not yet realize was that the board meeting scheduled for the following morning was not a routine quarterly review, but a strategic restructuring session Shaq himself had called after receiving multiple anonymous complaints about discriminatory practices across several properties, complaints that had quietly accumulated in his inbox over months. And Miera's experience was not an isolated incident, but the final confirmation of a pattern. As news of Shaq's presence spread through the hotel, guests gathered discreetly, some whispering apologies to Miera as they pieced together what had occurred, while others recorded snippets that would soon ignite social media, and Shaq turned to the assembled staff, announcing that effective immediately, Richard Calloway was being placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. His access credentials revoked on the spot as security, now visibly uneasy, escorted him not a teenage girl but their own boss out of the building. The irony sharp and poetic. But the twist did not end there, because later that evening, as father and daughter settled into the very executive suite Richard had claimed was unavailable, Shaq revealed to Miera that he had intentionally kept his ownership quiet to observe how leadership treated guests when they believed no spotlight was on them, a silent test of character that too many had failed. And Miera confessed that part of her had wanted to mention her last name immediately to avoid the confrontation, but she was proud she hadn't, proud she had stood on her own merit, even when disrespected. And Shaq smiled, telling her that true power was not in name, dropping but in integrity. By morning, headlines blazed across local and national outlets detailing the incident, sparking conversations about profiling in luxury spaces. And Shaq took to a press conference not to boast about ownership, but to announce sweeping reforms. Mandatory bias training conducted by independent experts, a transparent reporting system for guests, scholarship partnerships with local hospitality programs to diversify management pipelines, and the formation of a community advisory board to ensure accountability. And he made it clear that this was not about one man losing a job, but about transforming a culture, about proving that ownership meant responsibility, not just profit. In a final twist, it was revealed that one of the anonymous complaints that had prompted Shaq's investigation months earlier had been submitted by a former front desk clerk who had been quietly fired after challenging Richard's treatment of minority guests, and that clerk was invited back, not only reinstated, but promoted into a leadership role on the reform committee, a full-circle moment that underscored the hotel's new direction. As for Miera, she attended the charity gala the next evening, not as a victim, but as a symbol of resilience, her head held high as guests who had witnessed the ordeal approached to express admiration for her composure. And in a private moment on the balcony overlooking the Atlanta skyline, she reflected on how quickly perception could shift, how a people's space that had felt hostile 24 hours earlier now buzzed with genuine warmth. And she understood that while prejudice might lurk in corners of even the most polished institutions, courage and accountability could drag it into the light. The Grand Dominion would never be the same after that weekend, and neither would Richard Calloway, whose career in hospitality became a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms about the cost of bias in an era where transparency reigns. And as Shaq wrapped an arm around his daughter, cameras flashing below, he reminded her softly that legacy wasn't just about championships or business deals, but about the standards you enforce when no one expects you to, about the example you set for the next generation, watching how you respond when wronged, and somewhere in the lobby beneath chandeliers that once illuminated humiliation,